would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and work, the Gundungurra land and people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I also want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which you, our listeners, are joining us from today. I recognise the deep connection that First Nations people have to this land, their enduring culture, and their commitment to the preservation and care for their country. This land was never ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Hey there, and welcome to Beyond the Surface, the podcast where we explore the stories of people who have survived religious trauma, left high control or cult communities, and are deconstructing their faith. I'm your host, Sam, and each week I'll talk with individuals who have taken the brave step to start shifting their beliefs that might have once controlled and defined their lives. Join us as we dig into their experiences, the challenges they've faced, and the insights they've gained. Whether you're on a similar journey or you're just curious about these powerful stories, you're in the right place. This is Beyond the Surface. Welcome, Luke. Thanks for joining me.
Sam, thanks for having me. It's so good to be here.
I am excited about this episode because your book was so freaking good. It was so freaking good. And so I was so excited when you said yes to jumping on the podcast with me. Before we get into it, for some context, where in the world are you at the moment?
Well, I am a Shirk postdoctoral fellow at University of Toronto, Mississauga, so Toronto area. But I was formerly a postdoc at University of Calgary, though I lived in Toronto when I was doing that postdoc. And you're in Australia, right?
I am, yeah. We are worlds apart. How many times do you get mistaken for being someone from the US?
Gosh. You know what? I hate it, and I understand why. Like, it totally makes sense.
Mm,
I mean, I think once I have like two beers in me, my accent comes out pretty, it's pretty thick, and so I think people won't be all that confused at that point. But before that, yeah, it's an unfortunate
yeah.
confusion that very personally. But no, yeah, it happens more often than I care to
Yeah.
admit.
It's so funny because I'm sure from our perspective, it's like, yeah, I mean, there are similarities, but in the same way that people seem to think that Australians and New Zealanders sound the same, and we're like, oh, we are worlds apart. It's so funny. But I think to anybody who is not drenched in it, they sound the same. So it's fine.
Well, you know what? I think it also doesn't help that I lived in the States for 9.5 years. And so when
Um,
people know that, or people hear that about me, or they, again, it's funny what you get like known for. And at this point, I'm known for like conversion therapy and Liberty University, two things that like, dear Lord, like what a resume. But when both of those things happened in the States, right?
yeah.
So I think that people oftentimes when they learn about my work before they know me, immediately assume I'm from the US, and
Yeah.
a big no way, Jose. I'm not. I'm born and raised in Toronto, and yeah, that's me.
Yeah, there's probably no more time in our lives that you would really want to hammer that home, hey?
Yeah, so exactly. Right now, it is not a cute look, right? Yeah, I'm from the
No.
US. Dear Lord, like no,
Oh.
I'm kicking stones. I'm going the opposite way. No
Yeah,
way.
absolutely. Okay, before we derail the whole conversation completely, I like to start these episodes with a super broad, vague question. So, where does your story start?
Oh gosh, you know what? Where's my phone? I have on the back of my phone. This is my phone case, and so it's the Wilson family circa
Oh,
1943. So I guess kind of there. Maybe
oh
maybe
my
that's where I.
goodness.
I'm the youngest of five, and I think that I still fit that role quite well. And I fit every stereotype you sort of think about when you think about a youngest child. That I'm gay, first of all, that, everyone to this day still does things for me, like taxes and stuff. My sister thing. Thank you, Kaylee. That kind of stuff. So I would say that being the youngest of five kids certainly has shaped who I am and how I navigate this world.
Yeah.
But I also think that my story in part starts, well, connected. It's connected to that, of course, is, with my parents. And I was very, very close to my dad. I was very, very close to my mom growing up as well. I'm not close to her now. But growing up, my mom, I was very much a mama's boy again, living into that gay stereotype. And but nonetheless, very close to my dad, and arguably closer to my dad. It was just that I don't know, however it works, family dynamics, blah 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 blah. But with my mom, she was very much haunted by her religious upbringing, and she was raised in a Baptist home, so an evangelical home, also in Toronto. And I think because of that, that sort of, what she carried with her forward, what she carried forward with her, after being raised in the home that she was raised, I think that really impacted me in a lot of ways because we weren't really a Christian family. It wasn't like, we were dedicated to going to church. We went to church for me up until about grade 2 or 3 on and off. After that, we just stopped going. Like any good Canadian family, we went to the cottage instead. And so before that, though, again, we were on and off at this Baptist church. But my dad was agnostic. When we came home from church, it's like you went to church, went to Sunday school, and came home and shut the hell up about it, right? Like you just did not talk about Jesus. That was not, thank God, a topic of conversation. We learned our prayers, we learned how to say grace, and that was sort of it. So I think it's almost like by its very absence, religion's absence in my life as a young kid, it became all the more sort of magnified, and my desire to sort of pursue that became all the more intensified as I grew up. And so I'd say that's really where I started. My story starts with my family, both with my siblings and my parents.
It's the equivalent of like when you tell kids not to touch something or not to do something. That's all they want to do, right? It just entices them so much more.
It. That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that my siblings all had much more of an exposure to religion than I did. And so I think by the time I became invested in, questions of God and,
Mm,
you know, theology and all this kind of stuff, I think that at that point they had all sort of like had that exposure and were like, nope, we're good. And for me, because I didn't have it, I was like, oh, I need to figure that out. I need to go explore that. And so
mm,
you're right. I think it was sort of this like um not forbidden thing because it wasn't forbidden. In fact, it was encouraged by my mom,
mm.
but it was something that was just not um, a really a thing for me in a lot of ways. And so I think again, by its very sort of absence, because of its very absence, I became again all the more allured.
Yeah. In those sort of like early childhood, teenage years, what was it like for you to realize you were gay? Was it during that period of time or was it much later? How was sexuality talked about? I do like four-barreled questions in one. Um, but like how is because I think we mostly know in most religious families how sexuality is posed. But when you have a parent who has a complex relationship with religion and an agnostic dad, how is sexuality framed in that household?
Yeah, so to answer the first question, when did I know? I mean, I knew I was a big old homo from like, like I was like 4 or 5, like I was
Yeah.
pretty young. Um, and I think that for me that realization didn't really impact me in the sense that because I was from a family where this was not something that would be okay to talk about or identify with,
Mm,
for me it was just like I was a young kid and before puberty like it doesn't really matter, but like you do recognize like I'm more drawn to like the boys over here than I am to the girls. And there was like when I was super young some attraction to girls, but like that faded real quick. And then it was just exclusively, my attraction to guys. And I think for me, my dad, or sorry, for in my family, my dad would have been a-okay with it. Like my dad was this super hippity dippity, free loving, pot smoking, record store owning, social worker for like differently abled folks who wrote a book on Bob Dylan and had a music studio in our basement. So like it was like he was a-okay. Like Keith was a cool guy, vegetarian, that kind of thing. Stop, but he never gave away his leather coats. He's like, I already have them, so I'm not going to give them away.
oh,
So once he became vegetarian, he stopped
fair.
wearing them. But, Keith's decision. So I, though, because of my mom, again, the message was very clear. And so to answer the second part of your question is my mom made it very apparent early on that it would not be okay for me to come out. It would not be okay for me to identify as gay because she would say, things like, "Oh gosh, I'm so glad none of my kids are gay." Or when we were leaving Toronto to go to the cottage, which we, again did quite often. I still remember there was this one time we were leaving Toronto when it was Pride, and on our way to Toronto, there's a highway that sort of goes through, not downtown, but close to downtown, and you have this like beautiful view of the city, and you're sort of like weaving out of the city as you go. And we were on this highway, and my mom said, "Oh gosh, it's Pride right now." And she goes, "All those guys, dancing and prancing around naked with their wieners out." She always said wieners. My family said wieners. I don't know why, but
Oh,
we did. And so for me, these explicit messages made very clear at a
yeah,
very early age that this was not going to be part of my lived reality, in the sense that I thought I didn't have to identify as queer. Why? Because I could never really fit into my family if I, were to be gay. I also think that the little bit of exposure that I did have to religion made very clear, and my mom's sort of reinforcement of this idea was that you can't be gay and a Christian. And nominally we were Christians. We were just sort of we're all evangelicals. We're all Christians. Meanwhile, I didn't even know what that really meant in a lot of ways. Other than sort of like broad overarching sort of strokes of like what is a Christian. And again, according to this sort of estimation of Christianity, that was in part defined by homophobia. And so I knew that it was not going to be okay to identify like that. So I was in the closet for up until I was actually 25. I didn't come out until much later,
okay.
but it really became a problem for me once I hit high school and I really started realizing that I was a big old homosexual.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that was going to be a future.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask one by like side question because I'm sure I'm not the only person thinking this. What on earth is the cottage?
Here I am speaking as if, they call this the curse of knowledge, and it's not even like knowledge that's worth having, but the cottage. The cottage in Canada, it's essentially like your second home. It's like where you go, for us, the summer, we would spend 6 weeks at the cottage. And then there would be on weekends, we would go to the cottage in like the fall, even in the winter, and the spring. And it's just like your second home. It's like a country home. Ours was in like the Niagara region of Ontario. And of course,
Okay.
people know Niagara Falls. It was like, 50, 60 minutes from Niagara Falls kind of thing. Not like an hour and a half away from Toronto. So we would drive out there and live that rural life. And of course, I fit in very well as a young gay boy in Waynfleet, Ontario. In either case, I digress.
I mean, I was about to say rural and queer don't usually go well together a whole lot of the time. It certainly doesn't in Australia, that's for sure. And I can't imagine it does anywhere else in the world. Um, I am curious once you hit high school because obviously, we know that it is like the most identity forming years of our life. It's when hormones hit, it's when we make our most social connections, all of that sort of stuff. And so, what was that I can't be what I am? How did that sit in you during that period of time?
Well, I think the biggest irony of being gay was that I went to like the gayest high school in Toronto. Like I went to Rosedale Heights School of the Arts. You know what I mean? Like the writing was on the wall.
Oh,
Everyone
right.
knew that Luke Wilson was a big old flamer. However, Luke Wilson wasn't able to identify,
Yeah.
as a gay boy. And so it was actually kind of weird in the sense that my high school, like it was almost street cred to be gay. You know what I mean? Like it was like a-okay. You almost sort of like were cooler if you were. But for me, because I became a Christian like a few, maybe like weeks or months. I don't really know the timeline at this point. It was like early into high school, I became a Christian, early in grade 9. I became a Christian. So maybe let's say within the first few months. I thought that I couldn't be both a Christian and gay. And so that, that sort of question was made up. The answer was given to me that I had to be Christian, not gay. And again, it was just sort of this like funny the context in which I was, I found myself in this like arts high school downtown Toronto. I was the Christian kid. But of course, again, I think everyone knew that I was gay. It was just a matter of me finding out that truth for myself many years later.
Yeah, I mean, my brain almost sort of goes, that sounds almost harder than being in a school that would not normalize it because it's like you are surrounded by it. You know it's in you. You can't admit that it's in you because you don't think that you are allowed to be this dual combo of identity markers. It's like that's amplified version of cognitive dissonance that's within you, but your outside world is telling, well, your school outside world is telling you that it's completely fine.
I think it was almost like, and not to say I was the emperor because I was like a lowly servant, but like the emperor had no clothes. It's like everyone around me was like she's a little fruity, you know what I mean? And then I was the one who was like, no, I'm Christian. No, I'm Christian. I can't be gay and Christian.
Yeah.
And again, I knew that I was attracted to men. And again, talk about cognitive dissonance, where I'm like, I'm not gay. I just am
Yeah.
attracted to men. I struggle with same-sex attraction. It's not who I am. It's just like it's like an addiction. It's something I struggle with. And so I think that again, everyone around me certainly, other than my mom and my sister, they were somehow surprised when I came out, which I still makes no sense to me because I watched a lot of HGTV at home, home and garden television, of course. And
Yeah.
so I I think that for my everyone else, again, people knew like I was not like this like ultra mask, young guy.
Yeah.
I was in a dance company. I did visual art. Like I did well in school. I was just a big old homo. And again, it was quite clear, but for everyone but myself.
Yeah. So what was that like for you at like, midnight when you're in your room on your own and you are not dealing with anybody else in the world? What was that like internally for you?
You know what? It's funny. I think that like you can take the boy out of the church, but you can't take the church out of the boy. When
Yeah.
I was in youth group, and because like by grade 9 onwards, I was in the church, and I was, grade 9 to age 25, 20, yeah, 25, I would say. I was dedicated to going to church, and I was a part of a bunch of sort of evangelical communities. Um, but now that I'm out of it, again, I think it's funny what you hold on to. And the first thing that comes to mind when you say like Luke, late at night, just you in your bedroom, I immediately think of porn.
Yeah.
Like that's what all you know what I mean? Like that's all evangelicals talk about. All they talk about is porn. All they talk about is masturbation and having to fight it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, look, it's the most cruel and twisted system. And I laugh, but it actually did cause a lot of emotional and arguably spiritual harm
Yeah.
when I was a kid. This prohibition against acting on your very natural desires of being a sexual, individual, being a sexual person. This was considered verboten, right? Like this was not allowed, and you had to fight with everything that was within you against these natural urges.
Mm.
And I remember like being just torn constantly if we're talking about my bedroom,
Yeah.
thinking, and I didn't even have a door on my bedroom, which looking back was like, and I don't know why I didn't have a door, but like never did I have a door bedroom. And so there was no real privacy. And again, if we are to think about being an evangelical, there's also no privacy within the evangelical world. Like evangelicals have no personal boundaries. So it kind of worked for me. I was like, whatever, I'm already evangelical. Who needs a door on my room? But I think that for me, it was just like constantly warring against myself, like not to masturbate, not to look at porn. And then invariably, I would just find myself on this like French website that I always went on, which was very convenient. By the time I got to Liberty, when there was an anti-porn blocker on the university's campus, it was great because it only blocked English porn sites. And here I was going on the French.
Loophole.
Yeah, it's good. That's the upside of being from Canada. You learn both French and English, and so you learn from a young age how to navigate the internet by way of two languages. And I was able to find what I apparently wanted, but was actively sort of discouraging myself from pursuing.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of fun.
We love a loophole. Um, Whilst you were sort of like in that middle of high school, going to church more in it than you probably have previously been, who was God to you during this period of time?
You know what? God was super cool. Um, and of course, God's always really a product of your not only imagination, but your desires, your anxieties, your ego. And so God loved me a lot. God also didn't love that I was, attracted to men, and that was something I needed to fight against. So that was always something that never, or sorry, that was never something that made sense to me because it didn't make sense that God was so perfect, God was so cool, God was so loving, and that this part of me that really didn't have any negative consequences that I could see.
Yeah.
Um, that God hated this part of me. And so that was one thing that, again, it never jived with the rest of my understanding of God. But when I did think about God in general, strokes, I think that I was in love with this being that I was told loved me, that would never leave me or forsake me, for it to cite scripture, and one who loved me despite my sexuality. Because again, I was so in the closet, so scared, so ashamed of who I was, that no one else knew, in the sense that I had not told anyone. But God, of course, knew, and God and I talked about it all the time. And so it was a neat reprieve, because I was told, it was made clear that I should not tell anyone. So I was, in this sort of like space of silence. I was like, unable to share this with people. So the fact that I was able to share it with God, and that God didn't say like F you, like I'm out, that for me at the time really was powerful. Again, if I could have just go back and realized like that God doesn't care. I mean, I don't believe in God the way that I believe. I don't really know what I believe anymore. I don't really care what I
Do
believe.
any of us?
You know what I mean? Like, who cares? God doesn't care about me, so clearly I don't care about God. So like, we're fine. But like, I think that for me, I wish I could go back and just be and explain to that, at the time, like 14-year-old Luke, that hey, like God doesn't give two hoots that you're a big old homosexual. Like, you're fine, and that would save me a lot of trouble. But of course, that wasn't the case, and my life took a very different turn. And we're here to talk about that in part, I
Mhm.
suppose.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I do want to, because I obviously want to get, everybody wants to get to the part where we talk about Liberty University, but I do want to ask one more question before that, which was, did you feel like you were actively suppressing your sexuality, or was it that you just were yourself, but there was just no internal admission that how you were acting and who you were was gay? Or were you trying to suppress parts of yourself and your sexuality at the same time?
I was absolutely trying to suppress my sexuality. I tried not to look at porn. I tried not to masturbate. I tried, even what evangelicals refer to as bouncing your eyes. I tried to always bounce my eyes. So if I ever saw a guy who I thought was attractive, and the problem was I found like everyone attractive. Um, I have very wide-ranging tastes, and so I every time I'd see someone I found attractive, I had to bounce my eyes. And of course, I was doing all of these, efforts were to suppress, my sexuality, and also even suppress like my the parts of my gender expression that weren't normative, right? That I like doing things that weren't considered stereotypically masculine, still
Yeah.
do, and those were things that I thought I had to really sort of again suppress. I had to, push down the what's the word? I had to try to make it so that my hands weren't as communicative, because gays'
Hmm.
hands are, yeah,
I
exactly.
know
The
floppy
wrists
wrists.
were far too limp. And so I was trying my best to fight these things.
Yeah.
And it's funny at this, and with that, I think that I was also convinced that again I wasn't gay. It was
Yeah.
this again, going back to the term you use, cognitive dissonance. It's exactly it. You perform these mental gymnastics that you are not gay. You just struggle with these things over and over and over, day in and day out,
Yeah.
and yet you're not queer, according to this mindset. And I was very successful in believing that I wasn't gay. I just had this struggle that cropped up constantly. And and so I think that you're constantly fighting it, even though you think it's real, but you don't think it's internal. You think it's something that's external, or some sort of like condition that has come into your, like, I
Yeah.
still to this day don't know how to explain how I and how evangelicals today conceptualize homosexuality. Is
Mm.
it something that's external? Is it like a demonic sort of influence? Is it a sickness that comes into your body and then sort of like takes over? Like, there's not really a clear conceptualization that I've found that maps onto my experience and the experience of how others have described it. So in
Yeah.
either case, this was again, I was able to say I wasn't gay. I was able to believe that I wasn't gay because I wasn't acting on it. And of course I was acting on it, but
Mm.
would ask for forgiveness, and then the whole cycle would start again. I'd be like, oh no, I'm fighting it, and then give in, and then fight it, give in. And it was just this vicious over and over sort of repetition that defined my days, my weeks, and my years as a young, gay evangelical.
Yeah. I think I use the term mental gymnastics so much with people to explain the experience of making something make sense that entirely makes no sense. And it is such a good term for what it looks like, but also just what it feels like in terms of like you are just like leaping and jumping and moving from one thing to another because landing in one space is just so unsafe, particularly if you land in the space that you are not supposed to land in. So you just jump and leap and cartwheel from one place to another in an effort to keep yourself safe, both physically and emotionally sometimes, I think. So, um, okay, so we're in Canada. How on earth did we get to Liberty University? Luke,
God,
how did we make that decision?
dear Lord, it was not God's plan. Looking back, Drake, he would be disappointed, and so was God. Um, no, I again went to this really conservative evangelical church that we had gone to when I was little. I went back to that church in grade 9, and that's where I started going to church every Sunday, every Wednesday, and any sort of youth event or even other events that I could possibly go to, I would go. And so that was my entire high school. And throughout high school, I thought anything that was Christian was better. I thought anything that was evangelical was like super, neat and hip, and I wanted to be a part of it. And so my mom's cousin, Gary, Gary, he was the national recruiter for Liberty in Canada. It just so happened. And my cousin, well, my mom's cousin's kid went to Liberty, and then I guess eventually got my what we called him is my Uncle Gary, my mom's cousin. He became the national recruiter. So so he eventually approached me and he said, "Hey, would you want to come down to visit Liberty?" And I was like, "No, I don't want to come down to visit." Like, he's like, "But it's a free trip to like Lynchburg, Virginia." And I was like, "Exactly. Like, I don't want to go to Lynchburg, Virginia." There's so much to say about the name, but we will put a pin in that for now. And so, and as I was like, even though I was wildly conflicted about my sexuality, I was also this like wildly confident and like overconfident teenager in many ways. I mean, perhaps in other ways that, not so much when it came to my sexuality, but every other way I was quite confident. And so I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm going to be smarter than all of them. Like, they're dumb Southerners. You know what I mean? Like, they get those accents. They're like from Virginia. Like,
Oh, I love
shit,
it.
no way. Like, I'm not going down there. And because I did well in high school. But again, I just thought I was like smarter than them. So I was like, I'm not going there. I'm not going to even go on this trip. But he's like, no, no, just come. It's fun. You'll enjoy it. So he eventually convinced me. So I go down on this bus trip. It was this chartered bus that they took from, just north of Toronto all the way down to Lynchburg and drove you right to campus. And so I got to the school and I remember being, just blown away because, everything's bigger in the States than in Canada. Canada is very, in a lot of things, very milk toast, right? Very like not exciting. And I love Canada. There are certain parts of Canada that are quite exciting, but there are a lot of parts that aren't.
Mm.
And everything's just bigger in the US. And so I get to this campus where it's this squeaky clean, new, renovated, like beautiful, well, what I thought was beautiful at the time, I think it's horrendous now. It's like gaudy architecture. They clearly had no gays involved in, planning that campus or designing it. Like, geez Louise. But I got there and thought like, oh my gosh, like this place is amazing. There's all these Christian young people my age and they're all so hot. And I was like, this is where I have to be. And so it was after the very first trip that I went down that I decided I was going to go there. And I went down 5 more times on this chartered bus, like looking back, like, what was she thinking? I don't know. But I definitely was excited and it was, it was thrilling to go down. And because again, it was just so different. And it was a place where, because in Canada, and especially at my high school and in Toronto, in particular, like these are Canada in general, Toronto specifically, and then my high school even more specifically, 3 godless places. You know what I mean? Like, these are not places that are known for or defined by religious commitments, particularly of the conservative evangelical brand. So all of a sudden, when you get to this place where you're like, oh my gosh, everyone's Christian seemingly, it gets so exciting. And you're like, gosh, like again, this is where I need to be. So all of this was amplified for me because I also found out on one of these trips that Liberty had a conversion therapy program. They didn't define it as a or present it as a conversion therapy program. Obviously, that's not like good PR. But they had this ad at chapel that said, do you struggle with same-sex attraction? And I was like, oh, guilty. Like, yeah, I absolutely do. And it said like, if so, like, you should contact this guy, Dane Emmerich. So I went to a friend who I had made there who was going to there. He was going to the school at the time. I said to him, I was like, "Yo, John, what's this business about this Dane Emmerich guy and is, working with like those who struggle with same-sex attraction, trying to get a little info, right?"
Mm.
And he's like, "Oh yeah, he works with gay kids on campus." And I was like, "Oh my gosh," or like, those who struggle with same-sex attraction, however he framed it. But I clocked that and was like, okay, like this is for me. Like this is where I need to be. Because not only is it a Christian education, but I'm also going to become straight. Like bada boom, bada bing. Like this is
Bingo.
everything's good. So that was why I eventually went to Liberty. And it was funny too, when I was thinking about going to Liberty, my big idea was that I wasn't just going to go. Um, and become straight, but I was first going to have a lot of fun with Christian guys, gay Christian guys, because my thing was I was like, yo, I don't want to be, a bad witness or give Jesus a bad witness by being gay at my high school and people being like, wait a second, aren't you a Christian? Like you can't be gay and a Christian, and then I'd be like bad PR for Jesus. So I thought, well, if I'm at Liberty, they're all gay anyway. Or sorry, they're all Christian anyways, and they are all gay anyways. That's another thing. One of the gayest places I've ever been in my life, Liberty
Oh, I
University.
bet.
But I was like, they're all Christians, so it's not like they're going to judge me. It's not like they're going to think less of Jesus. So I'll go have fun with Christian guys. At the very end, find a woman after going and meeting with this pastor, and marry her, whoever this woman. Like I love in evangelicalism, like a woman, like it's just like interchangeable. Like the devaluation of women within this religious tradition is flipping wild.
Mm.
But that was my big idea. And then I go to, meet Pastor Dane, go with Pastor Dane, whatever, work with him, find a woman, get married, go back to Canada, and God would be on our throne and the rest would be her story. And clearly that didn't happen the way that I thought it would. Still pretty gay, but that was a big motivating factor for why I went to Liberty as well.
Yeah. Okay, there's so much in there. I love that you used the term Christian and not judging in the same sentence. The irony in that is palpable. But um, okay, so how did it actually, like, how soon, once you were in Liberty, were you engaging in this program?
So what happened was, so we'll talk more about the book later, and I only
Yeah,
reference it just because in the book I have a story about my time in group conversion therapy at Liberty,
yeah.
but I only went to that once. And that the story in the book is that
Yeah.
experience. I went to the one-on-one conversion therapy program for all 4 years.
Oh,
And that's what I'll be writing about in my next book. So when that comes out, we'll
plug.
and the story is that I present in this new book, and I literally just finished it, a few weeks ago. But the story is that the way it all happened was that I was one day making my loft bed. I was standing on my dresser and I was wearing just my tidy whities. And I was too cheap because once I found out that they were tidy whities after I bought them, because I like opened the package and there was like no legs on them. And this is at the time,
Oh,
2008, where it's like not cool to not have legs on your underwear because
yeah.
that's gay. So I opened the package. I'm like, where's the rest of the underwear? And clearly I had bought briefs thinking briefs meant boxer briefs. They didn't. Newsflash.
Oh,
And so I was too Scottish, aka too cheap to throw them out. And I didn't want to waste my mom's money. So I was like, I'm going to wear these tidy whities until they're done. And I did. So I'm standing there. It has nothing to do with the story. It's just a little
oh.
context. So I'm standing on this dresser and I am making my bed. And all of a sudden I hear from behind me, I hear like, hey, Luke. And I turn around and it's my spiritual life director. His name is Matt. And he's like, hey, like nice underwear or whatever he says, blah, blah, blah. And I was like what am I I'm in my mind I'm thinking like, is he flirting with me? Like
Yeah.
again, imagine like someone who's like never flirted with anyone he's wanted to flirt with. I've like flirted with girls at that point, but like not really. You know what I'm saying? Like it was like very unsuccessful attempts. But I never really flirted with a guy. And so this I'm like, is this what I think it is? And he's like, nice underwear, like undies, whatever he says. And he's talking about, like what are you doing this weekend? And I'm like hanging out with you, I think. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, did I just flirt? Like, is this real? And so off he goes. And sure enough, that Friday we meet up. I had, went to the cafeteria, ate, come back to the dorm, walking through the dorm, and I passed by his room, and there he is sitting there. And he's like, it was like he was like waiting for like me to pass by because again, like I think he knew what this was going to be. I didn't necessarily, but I was hoping, it would be what I thought it was. And he's like, hey, like, what do you want to do? I was like, I don't know. What do you want to do? He's like, watch a movie. And I was like, sure. And I was like, which one? And he's like, Batman. And I'm like, oh God, like, what are we straight? But again, we're playing the charade, right? And
Yeah.
I was like, sure, like my first choice, but all right. So, I throw my stuff down. We start watching this movie. I fall asleep. And I'm not one who falls asleep typically up until like the past few years when I'm becoming an old man. But before that, I was like always wired and like sort of like I never needed like caffeine or Ritalin. I was just always off the walls no matter what. But I fall asleep, and again, which is so surprising even looking back because I was so excited in this moment to be in the room with this guy with the lights sort of dim, whatever. Well, we're watching this movie. I fall asleep. I wake up. He's like sort of like rubbing my foot, and he's like, "Hey, movie's over." Uh, and he's like, "Do you want to spend the night in here, or do you want to go back to your room?" Which, like, looking back, like, what a bizarro question for like two guys who are like, trying to act the part. Just
Yeah.
crazy. But again, an evangelical sort of the evangelical world, like it's a nothing makes sense. Don't look for
No.
anything to make. And so I was like, oh yeah, yeah, I'll sleep in here, like thinking as if it
Very
was like a question.
casual.
Yeah, I was playing it cool. And so I'm like, but I said to him, I was like, well, I need to go get my blanket first, as if like I needed like a cover for my like what the anyway. So I go get my blanket. It was like a R.L. Stein Goosebumps comforter, and we go into bed. Like I get inside the bed, and we're like laying as far away from each other as possible in this single bed. Like it's just this like 3.5 foot bed, however big it is, 4 foot bed, and we're both in there. And my heart, it's like a flipping cartoon. When I get nervous, you can see it bounce like beat through my chest. Like it's embarrassing. Um, and you can also feel it if you're laying in the same bed. And I'm laying there and I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. He can like feel it. He probably can see it because the moon, the light coming in from the window outside, the light from the moon was like showing. Even when I had the comforter over my chest, it was like bouncing. And so I was like, ah! Like so I tossed it down, and I'm laying there, but like clearly he can feel my heartbeat. And it's almost like you could hear it. And I think I could hear it because it was in my ears, right? But so we're laying there and there's a little back and forth. I'm like rolling around trying to like again cover the fact that my heart's beating out of my chest, and he's sort of moving. And then finally we like are laying on the pillow, and he's looking at me, I'm looking at him, and he moved forward, and then I moved forward, and it was just this back and forth, and there were moments of pausing, and then a little bit longer, and then quicker, and then eventually we sort of like go in and we kissed, right? And so it turns into this like weird, bizarro, upside down sort of romantic encounter, if we can call it romantic. I don't know if that word actually applies, but that happens. And so afterwards, the next morning, we wake up and his roommate had left. Like that was another thing. His roommate was likely in the room at that point. I don't actually know at that point, but like from us getting into bed to us kissing and doing stuff, it took some time. But again, his roommate was there at least by the end of the night. But he left in the morning, and so then that gave us the chance to sort of like finish what we started. And he got really immediately like he was ridden with guilt, like that good old fashioned evangelical guilt. Feels horrible at what he does, and he immediately gives me the cold shoulder. And so I left the room. There was a little bit of conversation, but I left the room and eventually later like texted him. I said, "Yo, we should probably talk about what happened." And he's like, "Nothing happened." And I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, this was like the biggest moment of my life. And I'm like distraught, and he wouldn't talk to me. And so at this point, it was a few weeks of going back and forth, like me, like crying all the time, like super upset, like wanting to talk to him. I even barged into his room one day and tried to talk to him, and then his roommate was there. And then I got really embarrassed and ran out, and whole thing. Anyway, I had one friend who I eventually told, and it was only because I wouldn't tell him directly, but then when I told him I had a poem that I had written about what had happened,
Oh,
I read the poem, and then he said, "I think I know what it's about," and then he was right because he was also gay. Anyway, I had no one really to talk about this with, and so I fast tracked the plan that I had, in my mind, that I wasn't just gonna have my fun with Christian guys throughout the entire time there, or throughout the majority of the time. I was gonna stop having Christian fun, gay Christian fun, and instead go and meet this pastor on campus who was tasked with trying to fix gay students. And so my plan was, expedited, and I began conversion therapy with him a few weeks later.
okay. Oh, I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm going, my heart is like breaking for like that part of you that just was like so sweet and so innocent in loving what you were doing, and then it just got like ripped out from underneath you. Like that good old-fashioned like Christian guilt that goes, if I don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. Like if we don't acknowledge it, we can ignore it. Is just it's so painful. It's so painful. I'm not surprised because, like, what you saw as what was going to be fun, it became not so fun anymore, right? Like, there was so much pain attached to it. Um, so what was the program like with this guy? Like, how was that for you? Because obviously, there is a big conversation around, um, this is, well, not like being pitched, but it is conversion therapy. And we know, well, I talk quite a bit about the differences between conversion therapy and conversion practices and the nuance that we need in that space as well. So, what was that experience like for you? Was this a very formal, structured program?
Yeah, and just to circle back to what you just said about the pain, it's funny, not funny, but you know what I'm saying. It's funny because at the time I thought I deserved it. I
Yeah,
thought I deserved the pain that I was feeling because I had done something wrong. I had done something sinful. I had,
yeah.
acted
Punishment.
upon, yeah, and that I deserved every bit of it. And so it's wild because that in part again I just wanted like alleviation of that. I didn't want to feel like that anymore. I didn't want to feel like I was disgusting and horrible. And also just feeling like I deserved every minute of it.
Yeah,
So that was also a motivating factor for why I went into conversion therapy. I wanted to be like free of not only homosexuality but also the feelings that were attached to it, the emotions that were attached to it. And so I met with this guy, Pastor Dane Emmerich. He retired a few years ago, but he had been doing the work before I got there, and he was doing the work after. He ran two groups, one for those who were addicted to homosexuality, me, and then one for those who were addicted to porn. And research
wow.
obviously makes it made clear that you can't be addicted to porn. You can have a dependency on porn, but it's not an addiction.
Mm.
And so, but this is the framework that he operated, within. And so he also did the one-on-one meetings with students. And so there were the groups, but there was also the one-on-one stuff. There was also the one-on-one stuff. So I I met with him, and in the beginning, it was almost as if he was not only trying to establish a relationship with me and establish sort of the groundwork, but in doing that, he was trying to find the source of where my same-sex attractions came from.
Yeah,
And so it was a very pseudo-Freudian approach to human sexuality, right? So it was like, what's your relationship with your mom, with your dad, with your siblings,
yeah,
and then I also would ask about like, guys who I knew and like who were my friends. Were they mostly girls? Were they mostly guys? And just trying to find the roots of my queerness. And again, it wasn't that he taught that I was queer. It was that I was just same-sex attracted. I was a child of God who just had same-sex attractions, and I was like, bitch, I'm both. But
yeah,
retrospectively, I can say that. But at the time, again, I bought into everything he said. I was absolutely following the program. I was following his teachings. And so what we did in the beginning, again, sort of taking that inventory, also like really detailed questions about like my porn habits and like what I was attracted to. Did I like daddies? Did I like, other twinks? Like what had I done, with so and so? What had I done over here? And like, really specific questions looking back, like wildly creepy. But again,
yeah,
these were the what's the word? The questions that were being asked. And so I, after the first few meetings, and we sort of established where this had come from, and we identified that it was my mom, not my dad, that made me gay or made me same-sex attracted, because my mom's overbearing, and so within this, sort of ideology, conversion ideology, it's claimed that either or slash both and, that you have an overbearing mother. Who overinvests herself into you when you're a young boy, and you start living too comfortably in the world of femininity, and then by the time you hit puberty, you go for what's opposite of you, masculinity. So I was going for what was opposite of me. I was attracted to masculinity, men. So the other idea is that you have an absentee or emotionally distant or abusive father, which none of which was true. My dad was like, again, phenomenal. And so that was sort of in the same way that you go to an all-you-can-eat buffet and take what you want and leave what you don't. This was like, oh, well, that doesn't really fit the narrative. Let's just, push that to the
Yeah.
side and focus on your mom. So we did. We focused on my mom. And from there, the program was, again, we met very consistently. And we would talk about my victories and my slip ups. Victories being moments I avoided temptation, slip ups being
Yeah.
moments I gave into it or into them. We read a conversion therapy manual. Mine was Alan Medinger's Growth into Manhood, Resuming the Journey. And that book, I actually had it up until recently and I lost it. I must have been lost in a move that I did, and I'm still TO'd about it, but whatever. And that we read that. And then we also, of course, read scripture together. He always prayed for me. I never prayed for myself, I think, which is quite indicative that he was the
Mm.
one in my behalf and talking to God for me, which, of course, within like Protestant traditions is not necessarily like the way to do things, but whatever. He took charge. He was a Dom daddy. So there was also a weird tactile aspect. And not that this was necessary. Well, I don't know if this was premeditated, but he would always do two things when we would meet in regards to him touching me. One, at the beginning and end of every meeting, he'd give me a big bear hug, almost to be like, "This is what men do," and like, squeeze me really hard. The other part was that whenever we prayed, he would either put his hand on my shoulder or on my leg. And I talked to someone else about this when he put his hand on our legs. And my friend described it. He said it wasn't enough to make you say like, no, don't do that, but it wasn't like low down enough that it wasn't something you didn't clock. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like you definitely missed it every time. And
Yeah.
so it was always just, and I always just figured that he was trying to like model good touch, bad touch in the same way he was doing that with the hug. He was doing that with the leg. We can touch other men, and it doesn't need to be sexual. Meanwhile, like that this man at night was thinking things, and feeling things. And so this was the program. And for me, I think that in part, like one of Emmerich's explicitly stated goals was that he wanted to get rid of the shame that we felt and instead really emphasize the guilt, which is both like, oh, that's a good objective. The other part's like, wait a second, what? And the way that he understood it was that we have been made as queers to feel ashamed for who we are, but we should never identify as queer because why? We're not. We're just children of God, sons of God, who struggle with this. So he wanted to get rid of that shame and that really sort of deep-seated like self-hatred for who we are. And instead, he wanted us to feel bad when we did something bad. So in the way that guilt in a court of law, like you're guilty in a court of law if you've done something, you've stolen a candy, you get slapped on the wrist, you go to jail for a day, and then you're released. And you're guilty for that action, but you're not guilty as a person. You're just guilty for that action, that bad thing. So you're not bad as a person. You're just bad for doing that one individual action. Whereas shame is that you as a person are bad. You as a person are dirty or defective or degenerate. And so he was trying to really accomplish the former and push against the latter. So he said, which in some ways it was like, you know what, like you're making me feel like I would think to him, or I'd say to him like you're making me feel better because you know I don't I'm not like hating myself necessarily the way that I used to. Instead, I just feel bad when I do something bad. The thing is that when you leave a place where you're constantly being told over and over, and that message is being reinforced that you're doing well, you're on the right path, you're not bad as a person, even though Christians like fundamentally believe that. That's what like original sin
Yeah, I was
is.
like, it's founded on that belief, but
You know what I
okay.
mean? It's so funny, right? Again, mental gymnastics,
Yeah.
cognitive dissonance, and so I when I left that system, that's where I always say that the violence of conversion therapy for me
Yeah.
really set in. It wasn't because in the moment I was being told, nope, you're doing the right thing, you're on the right track, you're fighting against, you're fighting the good fight. But when I left and I didn't have that message on a weekly basis and I was left to my own devices, that's when I realized nothing's changing. And if I believe that God is a good God, and at the time I did, and that God wants me to be straight and I'm not changing, it's not God's fault. Why? Because God's perfect. Therefore, whose fault is it? It's my fault. And that's when that guilt turned inwards, and that's when that guilt turned into shame, and that shame turned again, sort of snowballed into that self-hatred and that self-abnegation that just became that really wonderful sort of emotional storm that defined again so many of my months and years.
Yeah. I want to talk more about the shame, but I also want to ask how all of this, because we know that they try to pin it on a particular parent in most cases, like you said. How did that then impact your relationship with your mum? Because you are in it, believing that this is the case, right? So how did that then impact your relationship with her?
Well, I mean, a lot of this was being, well, this was all of this was being taught when I was away from home.
Yeah.
Granted, I called my mom pretty regularly. Like I would talk to her at least once a week. Um, and so I think that for me, I think I really I actually don't think it impacted too much in the sense that it changed anything in how I approached her. I think it made me definitely resentful internally. I never expressed this to her because if I did, it would be like, why are you thinking about this? Oh, because I'm gay. Oh, I can't say that. So that never came out.
Yeah.
So even if I had of like, and I did, I was resentful for that, right? What I thought was why I was gay. It didn't really impact anything because again, I wouldn't have been able to explain that to her. And again, I was just always sort of like deferent to my mom. And no matter what, you within that religious, tradition, you have to obey your parents and you have to just submit to them in the way that you submit to God and the way that a woman submits to a man when they're married, which is just BS and bonkers. But all these things. And so I think that for me, maybe it did affect it. I don't know, but I've actually never thought about that. And I'm just thinking off the cuff. I don't think that
Mm.
there's anything that comes to mind that's all that apparent, at least
Yeah.
not right now.
Yeah, I
Uncompletely
mean, I
articulate.
guess I was just curious because obviously, if you are being repeatedly told that one parent of the two is the reason why you are now cursed with this affliction of having to go through all of this, I feel like it would be then a natural result to, like you sort of said, have some resentment or at least to shift the way that you would perceive that parent and their role in your world. But I mean, perhaps the distance boded well for you.
I also think that I was just, again, I think within evangelicalism, you're often just told that over and again, which is I this is ironic again in light of how Emmerich was trying to make it so that I wasn't ashamed of myself. But you're just told over and over and over that you're sinful, that you're disgusting, your righteousness is filthy rags, which the modern, equivalent is like a used tampon
Yeah.
to God. So I think at the end of the day, even if my mom was the quote unquote source, it wasn't I still had to take responsibility for what my part in this as if I had a part, right? Like as if there was like some sort of choice. But again, this is I always say to people like evangelicalism has a logic to it, but it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like so I think that for me it just didn't affect my relation to my mom that I can think of. Maybe it did, but again, not that I am conscious of.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my perspective, it sounds a little bit like this guy was trying to um, help you get out of a shame space by using a shame-based system, thereby we're still living in a state of shame. It's like trying to shame someone out of feeling shame. It's so, like, the irony is insane.
It's super effective.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's like one of those things that it just goes, oh, that's so stupid. It makes my brain hurt. But like, how does that live in you? Because like, obvious, like I'm sitting here going like my therapist brain is like pinging, going like, how is that living in you? How is that impacting the way you move through the world, the way that how you feel about yourself, and the physical impact of that on your body and your health and your mental health?
So I again, I think that at the time, in a weird, twisted way, the desire to focus on guilt and to remove the shame,
Mm.
at least, maybe the shame was never really removed in a lot of ways. Maybe it was just
Yeah.
pushed down. It was just the focus was on the guilt.
Mm.
And so I think that even though his goal was to get rid of the shame, I don't think the shame was
It
erased.
sounds
It
just
was
like diversion. Like, just
Yeah.
divert to this instead.
Uh, This is diversion therapy now. Anyway, no. I focused on the guilt, and so I think that for me, that afforded me some sense of relief, at least temporary relief in the moment. But again, afterwards, the shame is what comes to the fore. It came to the fore. That's what defined how I understood myself. I thought I was disgusting. I thought that I had to hide. I was living in, this space of silence and secrecy. And obviously, and the reason was because the glue that held it all together was the shame. And I think that for me, looking back at Liberty, it was just it was a very confusing time in a lot of ways, though what's also so wild about evangelicalism and holding these two things in tension is the belief that you have the answers to everything, that you have a clear, defined telos, that you're going to go from, here on earth up to, heaven and eternity with Jesus and the eschaton, and, all of this tomfoolery. And so you both have this really strong sense of assuredness and like comfort and safety and security, while also having this like repeated and constant ontological attack against your like part of who you are, for me, my sexuality, and in part my gender expression. And so I think that looking back, it's always this tension and this holding of multiple realities. I wouldn't say truths, but at least realities together in tandem. And it creates a really, again, confusing sort of like lived experience because you're told one thing, you're living something else. You're taught is one thing, and you're believing on a visceral, bodily level something else. And
Yeah.
so it's this constant tug of war, like push and pull, that over time really fucks you up, to put it
Yeah.
academically.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I paid the price for years. And, it was years of deconstruction, years of therapy, and years of thinking and feeling through a lot of this when I went to grad school that really saved my life. And I do attribute grad school and higher education to like what got me out of this,
Mm.
and also what helped me heal through after this. But at the time, this is how I felt, and this is how I, again, registered all of these affects or all these emotions in the moment while trying to push them away, while also embracing them, while also, it's this, again, just juggling a bunch of balls at once. And normally we like balls, but not in this case.
No.
This,
I mean, the tug of war reference is by far the most common used imagery, I think, for a lot of people in this space. I know, listeners will have heard me use this imagery before because the way that I described my own experience was it felt like I had one foot on either side of the Grand Canyon and being my queerness and my faith just ripping me apart at the seams. Like it is that pulling apart motion that I feel like so many queer people who exist in faith spaces and have to deal with that tension experience. And so, how was that tension whilst you were healing in terms of what did that integration process like? Because there is like healing from the emotional pain and trauma and that, but how did that then integrate with what did affirming your queerness look like?
Mhm. So I left Liberty and I went straight into my master's at McMaster, this university back in Ontario. And it was there that I started to see the holes in the cosmology that I had, adopted for myself for years within the church and at Liberty. And so I was for the first time encountering theories that really diverged from my own theology. And of course, at the end of the day, theology is just theory, it's just theory about God. And that was really challenging. I was meeting people who um, really diverged from my theology, but obviously, because I went to high school at a public school and at middle school and elementary school, all public, because I went there, I had a number of friends who weren't Christians. However, I had never had conversations like I had um, before that point in an academic sense. And so these were academic, structured, scholarly, quote unquote, conversations that theretofore had not been part of my experience. And so I was beginning to be exposed to not just difference, but reasoned um, explanations and theorizations for difference. And I was like, huh, like diversity's cool. And like because I was again raised by my dad and also raised in public school, like I always thought diversity was great, except for when it came to gender and sexual diversity.
Yeah.
Um,
And your own, I imagine. Like
Gosh,
diversity
yeah,
for other people is great, but diversity for you, different story.
that's it. That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So I think that that was a big moment for me. And then when I went down to to Vanderbilt after that school in Nashville. And when I went there, that's when I said, I'm going to go down to a city where no one knows me except for literally one person. There's one gal I knew. And it turns out that I eventually went to the same church that she did, but whatever. I thought, like, no one knows me, and I'm just going to be myself, and I'm going to put my lived experience first and my theology second. Because up until that point, I had theorized first. So I said, this is how the world works according to like a very conservative understanding of scripture and, Christian theology. And I was like, I'm not going to let that determine my lived experience. I'm going to let my lived experience determine my theory for the first time. And I was like, I'm just going to try. I'm just going to see what happens.
I mean,
And
that's like fucking terrifying though, right? Like, what was that like?
but this is it, Sam, this is it. I think for
Oh,
people outside of the church, they don't hear how big of a deal that is.
yeah.
But for those of us who are in the church or were in the church, this is a paradigm shift. This is a whole different way of approaching the world. And so it was scary. And I felt like a lot of the time I was doing something wrong still. Again, I was meeting because I went to div school at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And when I was there, I was meeting people who were affirming. But I
Mm,
always thought, even though I want to be you, I think that you're just choosing your like
cherry
flesh
picking.
over
Yeah.
yeah, you're justifying your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And again, that's what I was doing in a way, except I guess I wouldn't say I was justifying it because I was just letting my life be and just living the way that I wanted to live, and then I would think about it later. And again, I really was sort of like putting it off. I was thinking about a lot of other things in div school and that were really complicating my understanding of God, but it wasn't in this specific context. Even like I remember the day that I realized that I didn't believe that the Bible was God's word, but that these were words about God, which again doesn't sound like a big deal to anyone outside the
Well,
church, but in the church, you're like, that's
huge.
heresy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, these little, which of course were not little, these big theological sort of jumps and leaps that I was making, were enabling me to begin to come to terms with my sexuality, and even that, like coming to terms, finding language that was appropriate,
Mm,
finding terms or language, right? And I think that for me was really necessary and nonetheless scary. It was terrifying because my entire worldview was shifting and it was very comfortable, it was very safe in so many ways up until that point. And like I said before, where like I felt like I had all the answers in life that I needed, but all of a sudden those answers were slowly not as, I wasn't as assured anymore of that these were the right answers. And things were shifting for me, and that started to really scare me. But it also allowed me to live more authentically and to say at least I'm not living into and accepting a fiction.
mm,
I'm at least living in the unknown, and that's at least more honest than pretending to uphold or to uphold something that I know is just not true.
yeah. What was that unknown like though? Because that in between phase where you are so used to stability and certainty and always having the right answer and always knowing the answer, you're the one that has the right answer, we've got the truth, all of that sort of like very moral superiority that comes with that space. The unknown again feels great because there's so many options and there's like freedom in the unknown, but also you can drown in the unknown. And so, what was that like for you?
That the unknown really came like there were moments before that when I was in Nashville, and I was in Nashville for 3 years, 2 years in school, 1 year teaching at this little liberal arts Christian college, which I don't know how the hell. Anyway, putting that aside, I eventually went to Florida to do my PhD. Big mistake going to Florida, but just an awful place. It's exactly what you think it is. And I loved my program. I loved my supervisor. I loved everything about everything academically. I just hated Florida and whatever. I digress. So with when I was there, it was most of my past research was actually on intergenerational trauma. I focused mostly on the transmission of trauma between Holocaust survivors, their kids, and their grandkids.
Yeah.
And so when you're researching a topic like that, you have to know everything in many ways. So it wasn't that I was just focusing on intergenerational trauma and the relationship between parents and children and grandchildren. I had to know about the Holocaust. And so a lot of my research really was at that point in Holocaust literature, Nazi propaganda, Christian theology, and it's the way that it laid the seedbed for the Holocaust, this kind of stuff. And so I was taking a class on Elie Wiesel. So Elie Wiesel is probably the best known Holocaust survivor, and Frank's perhaps the best known victim of the Holocaust. But Wiesel, Nobel Prize winner, wrote a night amongst like 40 other books, 40 plus other books. And he's just prolific. And so I was taking a class on him, and it was his response to God after the Holocaust that really shaped how I came to not believe in the God that I believed in for
Mhm.
years. And it's ironic that Protestants are called Protestants because we don't protest too much, right? Like we just sort of like willfully
Yeah.
acquiesce and sort of like defer to God. When in fact, of course, like Martin Luther being who Martin Luther was protesting the Catholic Church, right? But Protestants and evangelicals, we just sort of like, oh, God, you're right, period.
Mhm.
You don't ask questions, you don't challenge God, of course. And Wiesel, after the Holocaust, was bold enough to challenge God, and rightfully so, because what happened? Oh, right, millions of Jews were murdered. And so he was like, well, essentially, like, what the hell, God? Like, let's come to terms, let's figure this out, let's like settle this. Where were you? What were you doing? And why didn't you stop this? And of course, it's a one-way conversation, it's a monologue. God never responds, just like God never responds to anyone. Apparently, her phone is busy. Anyway,
Spoilers,
I
Luke.
remember,
Spoilers.
yes, oh gosh, I should have said it. You're right. And so I remember seeing Gazelle like talk to God the way that he was talking, and I was like, who does he think he is? And but then it was like, no, but like absolutely, like this is how he should be talking to God. This is how I should be talking to God. And I remember I was sitting on my couch in Florida, in Boca Raton, Florida, one of the most godless places of in this on this world or on this planet. And I was sitting there reading Gazelle, and I remember I was also on Instagram, like the really studious person that I am. I was on Instagram while also reading. And I saw that someone had said something along the lines of like this gal had said that, God had given her a free Starbucks coffee. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back. I sort of pulled on this string and my entire theology fell apart in that moment. I
Yeah.
thought to myself, who the hell does this gal, I don't remember who it was, but who does she think she is? Saying that God gave her a free Starbucks coffee, which of course presupposes that God um, uh, did not give that free Starbucks coffee to anyone else, including the person probably who's like asking for money.
Yeah.
And these are questions of theodicy. Like, how do we reconcile, a good God with a upside down evil world? And these are questions I probably should have thought about like much earlier, but this was just the moment that it happened. And I thought to myself, okay, wait a second. So if God didn't give that person outside the Starbucks coffee, but gave you that coffee, that's messed up. Because that's an active decision on God's part. That's a gift. And that's a willful decision that God made to give that her, but not him or them or anyone else, whatever they really not just want, but need. And I was like, well, that's effed up. And then on top of that, well, wait a second. Do I even believe that God, is acting in the world? Are there such things as miracles anymore? Because if there are, that's messed up because God's acting over here, but not acting over here. So I was like, okay, so I don't believe that God acts in the world. So God is like clearly self-limited God's self to not act, but had like sort of started the what's the word? The domino or
Oh, the
the
domino
series of
effect.
dominoes. That's the
Yeah.
one. Apparently words are not my thing. And so I thought like, okay, so God started everything, but clearly doesn't do anything now. But then I was like, is that moral or is that okay? Is that like good? And then I was like, wait a second, do I believe? And everything just fell apart.
Yeah.
And again, these are things that I should have been thinking about years ago, or years prior, but I hadn't. And so that's when, for me, I said, I can't believe this anymore. I can't be a part of this anymore. And if anyone does promote these ideas, that's messed up and they serve a bad God. And I don't want that. And I want nothing to do with that. I'm out. And that's how it ended for me.
And so, I mean, two things. Here's my double-barreled question again. Two things. One, were you out at this time or had that still not happened yet? And two, what was it like for you, both emotionally and spiritually, once that completely unraveled? Because, it is a little bit like once you start pulling on that thread and not just cutting it off, once you start pulling of it on it, it just dismantles the whole garment, and then you are just really vulnerable and exposed without it covering you. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, so I was about 27, 28. I don't remember. Was it 27? It doesn't matter. Whenever that Elie Wiesel class was, that I can go back and look at my syllabi or my syllabus. Um, so I was out at that point. I had been in a relationship that, thank God, ended around that time. Um, and the reason why that matters is because when I got into that relationship, that's when I came out.
Ah,
So I think I was 25 when I made it official on Facebook, and that was when those were the days when
that's
things
when it's
still
official. Yeah.
were only made official when they were announced on Facebook. And so I was definitely out. As for like the emotional and spiritual impact of that, just I guess conclusion, I was going to say decision, and I guess it is a decision not to believe God, but it's also, I think, it's just where the evidence lies, and I
Yeah.
respond to it. But I think that for me, it was again, I felt so unmoored. I felt so just like the rug had been taken out from under me.
Mm.
Um, in multiple senses, not just where it was a surprise, because it was a surprise. It wasn't like I was like leading up to this moment in a lot of ways where I thought I was. I mean, I was clearly like all the conceptual framework
Yeah.
and groundwork was really sort of being laid before. But on top of that, it also felt like I didn't know where I stood in the world. Like I thought when I die, I'm going to heaven and I'm going to, have a relationship with God and everything will be, great in eternity. I'm like, I don't even think I believe in eternity
Yeah.
anymore. In the sense that there's like a life after this where all of us are going to go. I think that really more at this point, I'm sort of convinced that like life just kind of happens in first, what is it, the first law of thermodynamics, that like energy and matter, and the second law of
Yeah.
thermodynamics, like none of it's created or destroyed, it's just always there, and so it'll just keep changing and whatever. So I think more like along those lines now, like just sort of like a naturalistic sort of
Mm.
um agnosticism, if anything, that like maybe there's a God, but I don't really know what it is, and it doesn't care about me, so
Mm.
whatever, we're both here, and that's that. But I think that for me, that was so spooky. It was so scary
Yeah.
to acknowledge that I did not have the answers anymore.
Mm.
And it was very, very scary. But again, I always took comfort in the fact that at least I'm not following a fiction. At least I'm not following this like made up, bizarro, upside down, moral, immoral fairy
Yeah.
tale.
Yeah.
I at least say that. And if I die and I go to hell after this, I can at least say, well, no, like I still don't think I'm wrong. I think you are. Like I think that this system is pretty effed up morally. And that's that.
Yeah.
And I also don't think that I'm going to go to hell, but just saying.
I think it's that nuance of something can feel terrifying, and yet the alternative is worse, almost. Like it doesn't necessarily negate the fear that lives in the space that you are in now, but it also the alternative just seems so much worse than that. So I think the nuance that you need to embrace once you are post church is just like immense, because you are still living with duality, but it's just a different kind. But I do want to ask a quick question before I get to the next one that's in my brain. ADHD brain is so fun. But we glossed over your coming out, so I want to just quickly ask what that was like for you, and also how that impacted your family relationships of coming out.
So if you've ever read Tina Fey's Bossy Pants, she has that story about like the guy who comes out, and it's like so he's like super dramatic about it, and then like it's so anticlimactic, and he's so upset. Um, mine, mine was pretty anticlimactic in a lot of ways, and which I think is good,
Yeah.
in ways also, because what happened was my mom was going to come down to Nashville and spend Christmas with me because at that point none of my siblings were talking to her, because she's not a very nice woman, and I was the last kid talking to her, and so I said, well, why don't you come down to Nashville, we'll have Christmas here. And she was all excited, but then I thought to myself, huh, how am I going to explain my shotgun apartment with the king, like the double California king size bed with me and my roommate? It's just not going to work. And so I got a little wine drunk one night and I called her and I said, "Hey, mom, just before you come down, you need to know something about me, and that is that I don't have a roommate, I have a boyfriend, blah, blah, blah." And my mom responded the exact way that I thought she would, batshit crazy. And that turned into literally, and I mean literally months of receiving text messages and voicemails from her describing what she imagined to be my sex life,
Oh,
which is so weird that that's where the mind went. It was not only you're going to hell, you're Sodom and Gomorrah. She couldn't even spell Sodom and Gomorrah correctly. I was like, know your audience. But she she was saying all these things like, you're disgusting, you're depraved, and I wish you were never born. I wish you weren't my kid. But then again, there was this really intense fixation on what she thought my sex life was comprised of, and describing like really gross sex acts. And like, I'm a naughty boy, but I am not doing what she thought I was doing. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
dear God, disgusting. And so she, and eventually I remember I thought to myself finally, I was like, you know what? I don't care who you are. If you're, the Prime Minister of Canada or my effing mom, no
Mm,
one will ever talk to me the way that she's talking to me
yeah.
ever again. That will not happen. And so I texted her and I said, we're done. You and I are like, we're over, period. And I didn't talk to her for 2 years. And then I did eventually talk to her again. And then when I did, within a few months, it turned into us not talking again. And then there was a time where she like, we never know with my mom, she's like pretending to almost die, or if she actually is almost dying. Like at this point, I think we know that she's not actually dying. But she like almost died. And so we started talking to her again. But then now we don't talk again. It's been almost 2 years. And so I think that that was definitely like not good. But I think that a lot of people are always like, oh, that sounds so hard. That sounds like it would be so difficult. And if I'm being as honest as I possibly can be, because people always question me, you always see like the sort of like suspicion in people's eyes. And I'm like, like you know better than I, don't you? Yeah, okay. But it's always that like you couldn't be possibly fine that your mom responded that way. And I'm like, when you grow up with a mother like Cheryl Wilson, and you know from a very young age that she is not like other mothers, and not in the way that like what's her face, Amy Poehler is like a cool mom. No, the mother that you wish that you wish you had the cool mom. You wish that you had a mom who wasn't constantly
Yeah.
crying all the time, who wasn't constantly requiring you to be her emotional support animal. You know that she like her crutch, who like didn't run like an unbelievably like messy, dirty house, like who again the list goes on. She was a hoarder, like literally like the episode of Hoarders, like it was my house, my cottage specifically, but also my house to a certain extent. So I knew from a young age my mom was not normal. I knew that my mom had a lot, and I mean a lot of problems. And my dad being who he was, who was like this like absolute king. Like Keith was just like the
Yeah.
coolest guy. So you had that critical distance and that emotional foundation laid by dad, while also having the knowledge that your mom is batshit. And
Mm,
so with that, when I did come out and I kept saying to my partner at the time, my mom's not going to take this well. She's going to respond unbelievably poorly. And like to a T, everything I said was accurate, not to pat myself on the back, just because, but again, when your mom shows you who she is, you got to believe who she is, like whatever she's showing, right? So for me, like when I did come out and she went nuts, it just didn't affect me. I literally, and I mean a literal one tear. I remember I like was looking in the mirror and I saw one tear come out, and that was it. And after that, I was like, but I don't really like my mom. Like she's not a nice woman. She's really, really mean, and she's been saying a lot of really horrible things. I said, this is kind of a good thing that I'm not talking to her. And then life just got so much easier every single day I didn't have her in my life
yeah.
because it was no longer me having to support her and constantly like encourage her not to like kill herself or to say like, oh, you're a good mom. Well, she wasn't in a lot of ways, some ways sure when I was younger, but like in a lot of ways not at all. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is like freeing. And so people always say like, are you sure you weren't like wounded over your mom like rejecting you? I was like, my mom rejected me long ago. Why? Because she made it very clear I could never be who I wanted to be or who I am, right? not who I wanted to be, who I am. And now I want to be who I am, but at the time I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I think that for me, that's that. Whereas that was the only negative response, other than one cousin who she's homophobic. She's now since come around since her kid's like non-binary, but before that she was like, I don't really know what I think. It's like, well, I don't really didn't really ask, so you can F off. But the rest of my family has been phenomenal. And again, my family's just great. Like I have such a good family. My brothers, I remember what happened was I told my sister because she was coming down to Nashville, and she said at the time, she goes, huh, so you're gay? I said, yeah. And she goes, I always thought it would be Quinn, my brother Quinn. And then when I told Quinn, he's like, the first question he asked was, did I have any role in making you feel bad about yourself? The first question, like to give you a very, you know what I mean, to signal this is the kind of
A
like
really
family I have.
beautiful question. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like, and then my brother Josh, being the dumbass that he is, when my mom had outed me to Josh, and also to Zach, my other brother, but Josh called me, and I knew that my mom had just told him because it was like the day, whatever. And I pick up the phone, and Josh goes, "Hey, buddy," and I was like, and that's like very Canadian, like buddy. Everything's buddy in Canada. It's not man, it's buddy. Hey, buddy. I was like, "Hey, Josh." And again, I knew that he knew, and he goes, so I heard you're gay. And I was like, yeah, I am. He goes, knew it. And I was like, shut up. Like, ah, you know, so that was that. So again, my family's just amazing. And like all of my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, everyone was just so good. My extended family, like Uncle Gary and all them, they went radio silent. They never talked to me again. But the rest of them was phenomenal. Like my actual like immediate family and my cousins and aunts and uncles, they were all amazing. My beyond that, like my mom's cousins and all them, whatever, who cares? But I have like an amazing family, and so I'm very, very lucky to be surrounded by such supportive folks.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if that had a role to play in the reason that I'm going to ask this next question. And if people have seen your Instagram, it's going to be no surprise why I'm asking this question because we have suppression to conversion therapy at Liberty University to unpacking like theology and all of this sort of thing into we have half naked shots on Instagram. And so like how on earth did we get to that? Like there's queer joy and then there's that, Luke. Like how do we get to that level of like beautiful public queer sexual expression on a public platform?
Yeah. You know what? So it's funny. I used to be nervous about um my propensity to show multiple sides of who I am, including
Yeah.
my physical form. Um, but at this point, because I used to think like, oh, the academy will never accept me if I do this, and they won't take me seriously. But then my current supervisor at University of Toronto, Mississauga, she said one time there was a question we were like talking about like, should I really be posting? I was talking to her assistant, and we were doing an interview, and she was like, we should talk about your thirst traps. And I was like, I don't know. Like maybe we shouldn't do that through like the
Yeah.
University of Toronto's like formal publication. And she was like, well, and I said, well, maybe we should ask Elspeth, my supervisor. And so we asked her, and her response was very short, very succinct. She just said, thirst trap away. And so I was like, done. Okay.
Permission
And
ick.
yeah, exactly. And so I'm very grateful for that. And that really gave me the green light. What I will say is that, again, I think evangelicals are made to feel great amounts of shame again about themselves in general, but also about their bodies in the sense that the body is considered the flesh and the flesh is considered sinful,
Yeah.
right? And so I think for a long time I was anti-body in that sense. Obviously, I wasn't because I was like very attracted to a number of bodies and people with whole hearts and
Yeah.
minds and whatnot. Come on, Sam, they're real people, not just bodies.
I mean,
And
I don't know
so,
if people have not paused this episode to go and look at your Instagram, they're doing something wrong, but okay.
well, you know what? I'm okay to be objectified. I really am. People are always like, you shouldn't be. And I'm like, well, why? Anyway, so I think that for me, it was in some ways a way of working through the shame that we discussed before. Another thing too is there's a beach in Toronto, and this is something that I'm so grateful for. And it wasn't just this beach; there were other beaches too. It's a queer beach, but it's also a clothing optional beach. And a lot of people, I think, are again, in general, this is not just within the church, but in general are terrified of their bodies also. Like there's also sort of that greater like societal apprehension and not apprehension, but like awkward or strained relationship one has with one's body. And so for me, that beach became a way, and amongst other beaches and other, other similar beaches, a way of just radically accepting who I am, right? Because like when you're on that beach, like you're not hiding much, right? Like it's like in the physical sense. And I think that the lack of sort of like uh sartorial or like clothing boundaries, if those are kind of stripped away, you don't really have anything external to use to signify who you are. So you really have to show who you are by way of like how you communicate. And that is, I think, really radical. I think what's also radical is just accepting who you are and what you like your body and presenting it to the world in the way that it is. And there's no questions. There's other than no, there's no questions. There's just simply like, this is who I am, and I'm putting it out there and take it or leave it. And on these beaches and on the in these spaces, it's always an embrace. It's always like, yeah, all bodies are beautiful, regardless of, you know, uh, like what you look like. There's just this radical acceptance of self. And for me, that was liberating. And it was a way, because again, for so long, my body had been the locus of my shame. And now it was a locus of it was a way of recentering in part who I am. Because I think within Christianity, there's much more of a focus on the eternal and the spiritual than there is on the physical and the carnal.
Yeah.
And for me, I was like, well, that why is that separated for me at this point? Why do I have this weird sort of like, why am I retaining this shame and this sort of like strained relationship I have with my body? I shouldn't. And so I think that these things really pushed me to accept myself for who I am first and foremost, to love myself, and I've never been sort of the person who's like self-love. Like I think for me, like I've always just been again, my parents in a weird way always sort of taught me to have like self-love and all this kind of stuff. And I still feel weird talking about it. Like I'm like still awkward about talking about self-love because I'm like, it's just like sort of like just love yourself the way that I've always sort of loved myself. But again,
Yeah.
clearly there are like blind spots, and I think those blind spots for me were necessary to fill in, and to look at and to examine, and again to sort of accept. And so I think that those things really allowed me to have fewer boundaries between myself and other people, and to accept myself and through the eyes of others, sort of like a Charles Cooley, looking glass theory approach. And for me, this was really transformative. This was liberating, and I think that that translates onto my Instagram, where I always said after I finished my PhD. I will get my I would work out. I always thought that I didn't have enough time to work out when I was doing my studies, which I absolutely did. Like I did a lot of other things that I could have just absolutely been at the gym. But I decided, pardon me, I decided that I would uh I would work out. And so I did, and that added another level of confidence because before I don't know, I just had like a pretty average, form. But then all of a sudden I was like, oh wow, I can grow muscles in a way that I never thought I could. And that was kind of exciting, right? Like it was just something that had never really been part of my reality. And and pursuing that and doing that and finding pleasure in that, and also in the actual act of working out. I do enjoy the working out process. You can tell how gay I am. I'm like the working out process, like a gay academic approaching the gym, the working out process. My Lord. Anyway, but this was it's something that I enjoy, and it's something that I find also helps my mental health. Not in the sense of like how I look different, but in the sense that working out absolutely relieves stress,
Yeah.
and redirects my focus away from my head and my sort of internal world and to my external world. And I think that these are things that should not be seen as in opposition to each other, but things that work together to make a holistic, healthy person. And for me, I found that accepting those parts of myself, all the parts of myself, and embracing those has allowed me to come to a much healthier place and a much healthier way of being, that I'm super grateful for, and that is clearly represented on on Instagram. But I hope it translates to other parts of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, I want to before I get to the last question that I usually ask in these episodes, I want to quickly talk about the book because like I said at the very beginning, it's so freaking good. It's heartbreaking as fuck, but it's so good. And so I have two questions. What drove you to write this book, and what was the impact on yourself reading these stories and compiling this book together?
So I was at the STI clinic, Sam, when I got sexual health is important. And I went I was on I got a message on Twitter, or the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Mm.
Uh and it was from this publisher, this UK publisher, this editor at this press, who was reaching out saying, "Hey, we've been following your work on conversion therapy. Would you be interested in putting this collection together? We think you're the guy to do it." And at first I thought it was a scam. I was like, this is predatory publishing. This is someone who's coming for me and it's gonna make me like pay thousands of dollars to have this book published. No
Yeah.
chance in hell. Well, I did a quick Google search, and it turned out that not only was the editor real, but the press was real. And I was like, oh wow, okay, this is nuts. Because for those who are in the academic world, it is almost never that a press will come to you unless you're like a big wig,
Mm.
rock star of an academic. No one's coming to a postdoc to say, hey, come do that, like edit this book or write this book or put this book together. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So when this happened to me, I was like, what the hell? This is wild. Cool. Did that, I checked, and then I negotiated with the press. They said, this is what we're envisioning. I said, this is what I would how I would respond. And really, I said, really the main thing I said when I responded to them was I want only survivors' voices in this
Mm.
collection. I don't want anyone else who has like an imaginative account, or has a friend or a brother or sister who went through this. Like, I wanted survivors only, and in part because a lot of recent media attention on conversion therapy has really focused on the practitioners. And I think that the conversation should be on both, but really the focus should be on survivors.
Yeah.
And so I said that that's the sort of what I think, this is the direction I want to take it. They said we agree, and so I put the collection together, and it was about a year and a half, if I'm not mistaken, of first putting out the call, then receiving submissions, accepting certain submissions, unfortunately having to say no to some submissions, and then working with authors through multiple drafts, and revising and just making sure that what they've written is publishable. So not changing the content, but changing the form, just making sure that it's, something that will be publicly consumable and understandable to read. So that's how the book came about. And then, of course, there's like the months of like campaign, not what's the word, marketing the book afterwards, which, my God, no one ever taught you that or told you that that was part of it. But
Yeah.
we've learned our lesson. And so since the book has come out, or maybe to answer your question, pardon me, while working on the book, and also since it's come out and reading it, during and also after, I think that it has been it taught me not I think the biggest lesson it taught me was that conversion therapy happens in like numerous contexts, in numerous ways,
Mm.
um, across space and time.
Yeah.
And for me, I always just sort of assumed that most, like all conversion therapy or most like conversion practices were similar to what I experienced. But there's such a variety, right? And it's not just within high control religious communities, though it is disproportionately, but it's not exclusively. And you find it in the familial context where your mom or your dad is your conversion therapist, where you become your conversion therapist, where you have an online conversion therapist, right? There's groups, there's individual meetings with licensed and unlicensed professionals, right? That with religious and non-religious professionals in medical context, in psychiatric context, and clinical context, right? There's so many, what's the word? Conversion practices that again happen in, across time and space. So that was a huge lesson. I think for me, reading the book, what was super impactful, or the stories that are included in the book that were eventually chosen, was just seeing myself in various ways and seeing how, although not all experiences are the same, they certainly rhyme,
Yeah.
right? And so that, one story in particular that I always talk about, his story. There's one of the contributors who's Australian, as it turns out, and reading his experience, it was like you were taking a page from my like diary that I never actually kept. Um, but it was just like reading his experience and like the anxiety for him of being in the shower and being terrified of touching his penis because he was scared that he was going to masturbate. I
Yeah.
remember being like, it's like these like little daily quotidian things that we do, or that we did, that within that world, within the evangelical, or white Christian fundamentalist or white Christian nationalist, whatever, space, when you're in that mindset, things like showering become sites of like extreme anxiety that
Yeah.
you think you're going to be tempted and you're terrified to go into that shower because what's going to happen? And then when you leave, you're going to feel bad about it. And then it's going to be a cycle where you go back to bed, right? It was reading these stories reminded me of things like that. And so I think that the collection, though I wouldn't say it was like what's the word? Uh, I wouldn't say that it like really like helped me like work through my past. I think that a lot of that work had really the emotional and sort of like cognitive and spiritual work had been done before, but I think it was comforting at least,
Mhm.
right? To see yourself in other stories and know that you're not the only person who went through that. And even if it really sort of like revivifies those memories, it was sort of weird because you block some of these things out, right? Your brain's trying to protect itself. It's trying to say like, hey, we don't need to think about that. We don't need to like
Mhm.
focus on that blocks it out. But all of a sudden, these stories kind of bring it back, and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this. Like,
Yeah.
it's just crazy. And so I think that the collection was surprising in that way.
Mm. Yeah, I think it is a really beautiful book for so many different reasons because I think it is going to be um, something different for everybody. And I think people who have never experienced conversion practices, irrespective of their sexuality, whether they are cis, straight, or queer, if they've not experienced, it will be enlightening. It'll be a learning opportunity. It will break down some of the misconceptions that they might have about what this looks like. But I think for queer people who have experienced conversion practices, there were moments reading that book that I was like raging and crying. And then, like, 5 minutes later, I'm laughing because it's so freaking relatable. And I'm like, this is insane. And yet it's so relatable at the same time. And so I just think having a collection of survivor stories is just going to meet it's like the equivalent of like meeting people where they are at. And it is just, oh, it's just so freaking good. It's so good. Yeah. So if people don't know that, all of the links and stuff will be in the show notes, but it's also all over Luke's Instagram, so also just like go back over there. Um,
I'm with my
but
nipple.
I just, yeah, okay. I'm going to give you, I usually only give people one question at the end, which is what I finish it in, but I want to give you sort of like two facets of that question, which is usually it is what would you say to someone who is deep in their deconstruction or deep in like the um pulling of the thread, whether it be like cognitive deconstruction or religious trauma or they've just been kicked out of their church or whatever it is. But I also want to go on the spin of like, what would you say to someone who is deep in that queer shame space and they're like really in that?
I think two things, and this is what I always, yeah, I say this when this question's asked, is find, I think that there's three parts to it. Read, reading's good. Find a queer community or a supportive community bare minimum,
Mm.
and separate yourself from the religious community.
Yeah.
Reading. With reading, it's never going to return to you void, right? You're at least going to be able to say, "Ha, I don't agree with that."
Yeah.
And you also ideally will be able to say why you disagree with that, which of course is, helpful. But I'd say expose yourself to ideas that you are uncomfortable approaching, or up until that point have been uncomfortable approaching, right? Even for me, like thinking about the difference between understanding it as God's word and the word and words about God, if I had have found, more texts that were able to speak to that, I think that I would have been able to accept that truth much earlier. I didn't accept it right away. I still remember there was the moment where I realized it, but it took a lot of struggle to get there.
Mm.
But I think that that's something that like reading allows you to to encounter ideas that that person has thought about for extended periods of time that will be in some ways earth-shattering for you or profound for you, um, or at least bare minimum thought-provoking for you, um, that you get to again accept, reject, whatever, but you get to like interact with those ideas, and that's going to help you in some way, shape, or form, ideally, or I would only expect. The other part is like or connecting yourself to your religious or to a queer community or to a supportive community, right? So for if you're talking about like in just the deconstruction space, connect with other folks who are deconstructing.
Yeah.
I used to poo-poo people who had like friends online. I was always like, what the hell? Like, I just have friends in person. Like, it was always how I did things. But then I eventually realized over the years, I'm like, wait a second. I've never met this. Like, there are certain people online. There's maybe like 4 or 5 people I know online who I've never met in person, or I met finally for the first time in person, and I was like, we've never met in person. And we had established such a strong bond, which was so surprising because again, I still am a little bit like online friends, but like at this point, I have a number of online friends,
Yeah.
particularly doing podcasts like these or like this one, where I'm like, no, that person is my friend, and I stand by that. And so I think that that has been so helpful because not only can you commiserate, can you complain to each other, but you can also relate to each other, right? Like in a really deep way, where like there was a point you were making before, and I forget exactly what it was, but I knew what you were going to say the moment you said like 3 words. And I was like, I don't even know you, right? Like we just
Yeah.
met. And I knew what you were going to say because we have that lived experience that's shared.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's that sort of like wild connection that you can have with people who share similar interests, in this case, the deconstruction or just being queer.
Yeah.
And I think for being queer, like for so long, I used to hang out with queers every so often, and it was like titillating. It was always exciting to hang out with queers when I would.
Yeah.
But because I never identified, it was always sort of like dangerous and, off limits as well. But then when I finally came out and I was hanging out with queers, I was like, first of all, like desperate to hang out with other queer people because everyone I was hanging out with was straight. But I was like finally like hanging out with queers, and it was like, oh wow, like you're not what I was told you are for years. You're not these like depraved, well, they are. All the queers I know are, but no, but not in the way that they were, I was told they were. But it was wild because all of a sudden these preconceived notions that I had sort of accumulated over the years, I realized were not true. So I think that's a huge part of like of finding a new life in a lot of ways, and it is a new life for me. I feel like it was a different life that I lived when I was at Liberty University, for example. And it's important. The last part is cutting yourself off from the communities that harm you. If
Yeah.
you are a person who still wants to remain a person of faith and you are religiously committed, that's fine. Like who cares? Like anyone who does care should check themselves. But for me, I'm not, and I have no desire to go back into any religious community, whether it be Christian or otherwise. I'm like done. Like thank you,
Yeah.
case closed or locked. But for those who are like, sure, if you want to stay in a community that is affirming, amazing. But if they're not, if they actively cause you harm, no,
Hmm.
you should, right? And I'm not the kind of person who's like let's like set this place on fire once we leave and like fuck everyone. No, if it needs that, sure. Like if that church or that institution, that organization needs that, sure,
Yeah.
do it. But it's more so that these are communities who have really good intentions. I really do think that. I think about my conversion therapist. I think he had good intentions,
Yeah.
and I mean that. Like the man desired what he believed to be well-being for my life. Clearly it was not well-being. Clearly it was like a lot of messed up like tomfoolery that caused a lot of years of damage and a lot of undoing of a lot of really dangerous sort of thinking. However, I do think that he was well-intentioned. Means nothing, but he was. And so I think a lot of these communities are, not all of them, some of them are as insidious as we think they are, but some of them are well-intentioned. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't cut ourselves off from them. Think
Yeah.
about my mom, right? Like she's she causes me harm. She causes me like duress. Like I don't want to be around someone who is like that and who operates like that in my life. And so although I really do want like religion to be a thing of the past, I do think that um if you are a part of a community that's affirming, phenomenal. But if you're a part of a community that is actively causing you harm, get the hell out.
Yeah. Absolutely. I concur. Um, I also, one of the things I've said on other podcasts is you also, like, it's not your job as a queer person to stay in that system and try and change it from the inside. Like get out, right? Like, safety comes first, always. So, oh, thank you so much for joining me. This has been so fun. I've loved this conversation.
Me too. This has been great. And again, it's always funny the connection you have with other
Yeah,
ex-evangelicals,
it's
right? You're just
wild.
like, dear Lord, you get it. You just get it. Wonderful.
Oh, amazing. Thanks, Luke.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Beyond the Surface. I hope you found today's conversation as insightful and inspiring as I did. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit from these stories. Stay connected with us on social media for updates and more content. I love connecting with all of you. Remember, no matter where you are in your journey, you're not alone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep moving forward. Take care.